Hello, my name is Matt and today we're going to be discussing the second generation iPad and how this holds up in 2021 and whether or not you should go ahead and buy one. So the second generation iPad was released in 2011, so it's around 10 years old in 2021, and it's running on the A5 chip, which is definitely a very outdated chip in 2021. And this iPad can be picked up on eBay for between £50 and £70, and this raises the questions: how does the second generation iPad hold up in 2021, and is it worth considering buying? And the answer here is that it doesn't really hold up too well. It's not a very good device in 2021, and for £60 it's definitely not worth buying. But that being said, I personally do use this second generation iPad and think that there is a use case for it if you've got a very limited selection of requirements. If you want very little from it, there is a use case from this iPad. However, I must say that £60 is far too much for something that's 10 years old. I would recommend that your budget max out at £30, and you can definitely get them for this price on Facebook Marketplace and on eBay on the auctions instead of just getting a buy it now refurbished one or something like that. So I'm going to give you a full review of how this iPad holds up in 2021, and you can make an informed decision as to whether or not you want to go ahead and buy one. So let's start with the design of this iPad. iPad design language has remained fairly consistent over the past 10 years, meaning that this iPad doesn't actually look hideously outdated in 2021. The major obvious signs of this iPad being outdated are the thick side bezels and the 32-pin charger. As you can see here, the iPad bezels are much thicker than a newer iPad, making it look a little bit outdated. However, I must say that when you come to using the iPad, the bezels really aren't a problem and they fade away and they don't bother me at all. The 32-pin charger can be a pain, as this is very old now and you may actually have issues trying to find the right charging cable, and I also found that it charged quite slowly. So the display on this iPad is not amazing. The iPad 2 has a pixel density of 132 pixels per inch, which is a fairly low resolution to today's standards. For comparison, the iPhone 12 has a 460 pixels per inch display. So this isn't a fantastic display, and you will definitely notice this, especially if you use this iPad after using any modern phone or display. That being said, it is a usable display. The display is just good enough to be usable and enjoyable to watch things on. I do personally quite enjoy watching YouTube and Netflix on this iPad, as it's a fairly big display and the colours look good. One big drawback of this display is that it is very hard to see in bright lights. So if you plan on using an iPad outside in the daylight, this definitely isn't good for you, as it is borderline impossible to see the display in a bright sunny day. Moving on to performance, this is where the iPad 2 starts to struggle. The iPad 2 is running on the A5 chip and has only received software support up until iOS 9, which is a really bad thing. So apps are no longer natively supported on this iPad, so you can't just go to the App Store and download stuff. You have to buy applications on another Apple device or have previously purchased the application, and then you go to the purchase section of the App Store to download apps. And many apps will no longer be supported entirely, and the few apps that do work will have limited functionality. Playing games is borderline impossible, and I really don't recommend that you attempt to play games. I tried to get some video footage of me playing games and I just couldn't get it to even load the games. It consistently crashed and wasn't a nice experience. Even seemingly light tasks such as browsing the internet on Safari isn't a particularly enjoyable experience. Web pages are slow to load, and there's a bit of a delay between typing on the keyboard and the iPad registering your touch. However, I must say that Safari browsing is one of the limited things that this iPad is capable of doing. You may experience the occasional crash, but just browsing the internet is acceptable. In my opinion, the very best use case for the iPad 2 is using it as a content consumption device. For example, YouTube, Netflix and Amazon Prime. As of current, these three applications do work on this iPad, but it's not guaranteed that these apps will continue to work in the future. As you can see here, even whilst using YouTube, the iPad does struggle a little bit and it does crash occasionally, but it tends to be once you've got the video playing, it will work fine. Ultimately, in my opinion, this iPad really is best at just being a content consumption device, such as Netflix, YouTube and Amazon Prime, and also including a little bit of light web browsing and maybe just taking notes. Moving on to battery. Battery is one area where this iPad still shines. It lasts days on standby and I can use it for ages with minimal battery drain, so the battery remains very impressive. One thing to note is that the 32-pin charger is very slow at charging this iPad, and it took me almost a day to get it to 100%, and that might be because I've struggled to find a 32-pin charger around the house, so I just ordered a really cheap one online, and it may have just been a dodgy cable, but just something to note. Finally, this iPad has two cameras. It has a selfie camera and a main camera. Neither is great, but it is nice to have the option. The front camera is a 0.3 megapixel camera, whilst the main camera is 0.7 megapixels. The back camera is capable of shooting 720p, which is a nice feature, whilst the front video can just record 480p video. Obviously, the camera isn't going to be for taking around with you or going to events, but let's say something pops up and you need to take a photo of a receipt, or you just need to take a photo of something. I think the photos are just about usable. So, to conclude, I definitely think that there's a very limited set of use cases where this iPad may be appropriate. Whether you're giving it to a young child to watch Netflix on, or you just want it yourself for watching Netflix and light web browsing, this iPad could be useful for you at a low price. However, I do think you should be prepared to find it very frustrating to use. Applications will just crash on you out of nowhere, and occasionally it will be very unresponsive. But if you can live with these things, then this iPad may be suitable for you. So if you've watched this entire video and you've considered the limitations of this iPad and you still think that this iPad is perfect for you, my advice would be not to spend £60 on this iPad. Ideally, you want to find it for around £30, £40. Try and get it as cheap as possible and look at auctions on eBay or Facebook Marketplace, because I just think that £60 is a lot of money for an iPad that's really not that functionable and is kind of borderline e-waste, if I'm being honest. Like, it's not got that many more years worth of life left at all. And if it breaks or if anything goes wrong with it in a few years, you've not invested that much money and it's not the end of the world. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this video was informative. I will catch you again in the next one. All the best.